Emily Carter stepped off the bus on 116th and Broadway with a thrift store suitcase, a second-hand coat, and the feeling that the city itself might swallow her whole if she blinked too long. New York smelled like rain on concrete and roasted chestnuts from a cart at the corner. It sounded like sirens and laughter and the low growl of traffic that never seemed to stop. She paused at the campus gates and looked up at the iron letters that spelled a name she'd whispered to herself all senior year, Columbia. Back home in Coffeyville, Kansas, the air was slow and clear and the nights were dark enough to see all the stars. Her father managed loading docks at the feed mill. Her mother clipped coupons with surgical precision, and on Sundays they cut pie into 6 pieces instead of 8 because it felt less like skimping that way. Emily had grown up on library paperbacks and the belief that words, if they were honest and patient, could get a person out of almost anything. When the acceptance letter came with a scholarship that made the impossible not completely absurd, she folded it under her pillow for a week and slept on it like a blessing. Everything in New York moved like someone had pressed fast forward. Her dorm was really a shared apartment with creaky floors, a kitchen the width of her wingspan, and a window that looked onto a brick wall. Her roommate, Rachel Kim, wore her hair in a neat bun and arranged her textbooks by color. Rachel's parents ran a dental practice in New Jersey and checked in every Thursday evening at 9. She was preternaturally organized and skeptical by instinct, and she adopted Emily the way some people rescue cats, gently but decisively. They fell into a rhythm. Emily worked mornings at the campus cafe, tamping espresso and steaming milk until her hands smelled faintly of caramelized sugar. Afternoons, she lived in Butler Library, tunneling through Whitman and Morrison and requiems for a country she was still learning how to see. Nights, she graded practice essays for a high school SAT prep program because $15 an hour was $15 more than zero. In September, Intro to American Literature asked for a 4-page close reading. Emily, nervous and earnest, turned in a 12-page letter to a dead poet. It wasn't showy. She circled phrases and worried over punctuation as if it could tell her secrets. On the 3rd page she wrote about a line in Emily Dickinson that had haunted her since 17, "Tell all the truth but tell it slant." She underlined it twice and without thinking, added in the margin, "Or maybe the truth doesn't like to be looked at directly, maybe it gets shy." When Professor Bloom returned the paper, there was a handwritten note at the bottom, "This is good work. Would you consider submitting an excerpt to the undergraduate journal? Also, you've caught the eye of someone else, come by after class." The someone else turned out to be Professor William Anderson, Dean of the School of Education. His name was on faculty email signatures and endowments and the brass plaque outside an office with tall windows and a view of the quad. He was in his early 50s, trim in a navy suit, hair silvering at the temples in the way of men who never had to look for a seat on the subway. When Emily stepped into his office the first time, he was not behind his desk but by the window, holding a mug with steam still curling up like a thought he hadn't yet spoken. "Emily Carter," he said, as if trying the sound of it. "I've been reading you." "You ve what?" She heard herself laugh and hated it immediately. "Professor Bloom sends me promising essays," he said. "I was the kind of student who needed someone to hold the door open. I try to remember to do the same." He gestured to a chair. The walls behind him were lined with framed photographs, a classroom in Detroit where children sat at tables with chipped edges and grinned at the camera, a charter school in the Bronx, a conference in D.C. where he shook hands with someone Emily had seen on television. Books leaned against books, spines worn, tabs like flags. "Your analysis of Dickinson," he said, "doesn't treat her like a specimen. You talk to her, and somehow she answers. Dit is raar." Emily felt her cheeks go warm. She had been told she wrote like a girl writing to a friend, and she had never known if it was a compliment. "I thank you," she said. "I don't always know where to," she stopped, unsure of the word. "To place it," he supplied. "Between scholarship and the things that keep you up at night." She nodded. He smiled then, not broadly, but with the quiet satisfaction of someone finding what he'd been looking for on a crowded shelf. "Have you ever thought about education beyond the classroom?" he asked. "Curriculum design. Policy. What we feed the minds of children before we ask them to carry the weight of a nation." "I thought about being a teacher," she said. "High school English. I like desks with graffiti on them and essays about the wrong things that turn out to be the right things." "Good," he said. "We need teachers who talk like that. We also need people who decide what ends up on those desks." He reached behind him and pulled a slim book from a stack. "May I?" He held out a paperback of Leaves of Grass with a cracked spine and a constellation of pencil marks along the margins. I give this to students who remind me why I started, he said. Inside the front cover, in neat block letters, someone had written, "For the days when you forget." Beneath it, in a different hand, a line, "There are multitudes in you." It's not a first edition, he said, a flicker of humor crossing his face. But it's been loved. Try to keep it from falling apart. Emily took the book. It was still warm from his hand.
Yell'll be careful.
You strike me as someone who already is, he said. Careful in the useful ways. He asked her about Coffeyville then, what the sky looked like, what her father did after his shift, whether there had been a teacher who had changed the temperature of a room just by walking into it. He asked, and when she answered, he listened like the story had been written for him. She found herself saying more than she had planned, about the second-hand prom dress that smelled faintly of cigarette smoke, about the bus that took her to the county library and the librarian who waived her late fees without making a speech about responsibility. After 20 minutes, he glanced at the clock. I know you have a class. I wanted to put a face to the pages I'd read. And to say, there's a program we'll be launching in the spring.
Éducation, innovation.
It's a mouthful and a bit of a maze. It'll place students on teams that work with public schools to pilot new curricula. It's competitive, and most of the assistants are grad students. But I like to make exceptions when the work merits it. She tried to keep her voice steady. Are you asking me to apply? I'm asking you to consider it, he said.
No promise today. No pressure.
He slid a card across the desk. Send me your schedule. Come by next week if you want to talk more. She tucked the card into the Leaves of Grass as if that was where it belonged. When she stood, he didn't offer his hand. He walked her to the door and said, most of the time, the hard part is believing the door is really for you. The rest is walking through it. Outside, the air had cooled. Leaves skittered across the path. Emily stood for a moment in the hall because her knees felt watery, and because the book in her hand suddenly weighed more than a book. She wanted to run back in and ask what exactly he had meant, what the program entailed, whether anyone from Coffeyville had ever done it. Instead, she went to class and raised her hand more than usual, and that night, she called home and used words like opportunity, which made her mother fall quiet in the way she did when she needed time to believe something good. When she got back to the apartment, Rachel had already made pasta and left a bowl on the counter with a post-it, "Eat before you faint." Emily sat on the couch with the book open on her lap and told the story from the beginning. Rachel listened with the same narrowed, precise attention she turned on multiple-choice logic problems. He's the dean, Rachel said when Emily was done. He's famous. He wrote that book everyone quotes in education classes. I know. He was nice. Emily hated that word and used it anyway. Not intimidating. People like that aren't supposed to be intimidating, Rachel said. That's how you end up doing things for them you wouldn't do for someone who growls. Emily shut the book, defensive without meaning to be. He asked me to consider a program. He asked for your schedule, Rachel said. That's not the same sentence. Emily leaned back, let her head thump against the cushion. If I don't believe it, I'll regret it. If I do believe it, I might regret it in a different way. Believe it, Rachel said. Just don't give anyone more than you mean to. She hesitated, then added, if he sends you anything to sign without letting you take it home, don't sign it.
Émilie looked.
I'm not going to sign my soul away in the dean's office. Souls aren't worth much in New York, Rachel said lightly. But your time is.
Your reputation is.
God those. After Rachel went to bed, Emily stayed up. She reread the inscribed line, there are multitudes in you, and thought about all the people she carried, the girl who hid in the library stacks, the daughter who learned how to ration shampoo, the student with the professor's card tucked into a book as proof that something had shifted. She wrote an email that she edited 3 times to remove the gratitude that spilled over the edges.
Dear Professor Anderson, thank you for your time today.
I would love to learn more about the program. My schedule next week is. When she hit send, the room felt very quiet. Outside, a siren keened and fell away. Emily pressed the book to her chest and closed her eyes. In Kansas, the stars were visible without trying. In New York, you had to know where to look. She told herself she could learn. She told herself the light was still there, slant or not, waiting. The following week unfolded with a different rhythm, as though Emily had stepped into a parallel version of her own life. Her mornings at the cafe still smelled of espresso and burnt croissants, but in the afternoon she found herself walking toward Low Library with her backpack heavier not from books but from possibility. She would pass beneath the marble columns and feel, absurdly, that the campus itself was watching to see if she would falter. Professor Anderson's office became familiar quicker than she expected. The tall windows framed autumn trees that turned a deeper red each day, as if nature itself had enrolled in the conversation. He rarely sat behind his desk when she arrived. Instead he leaned against the windowsill or paced with a mug in his hand, asking questions that seemed both casual and designed to slip past her defenses. What had Kansas public schools been like? Who had given her her first real book? Did she think literature should comfort or unsettle? She answered as honestly as she could, though she always left feeling she had revealed more than she intended. It wasn't long before the conversations moved from literature to the program he was building. He spread papers across the desk, proposals, grant applications, charts with arrows that looked like battle plans. Education innovation, he said, and the way he pronounced it made the phrase sound less like bureaucratic jargon and more like a promise. The project aimed to test new teaching models in underfunded public schools, partnering Columbia undergraduates with faculty mentors and policymakers. This isn't just research for the sake of publication, he explained.
Dix impact.
If we do it right, classrooms in the Bronx could be piloting our curriculum next fall. Emily felt a quiver of awe. The idea that her hands, still marked with ink stains from late-night essays, might shape what children learned across the city seemed impossible. And yet he spoke as if it were inevitable. Usually, he continued, we select graduate students, those already entrenched in pedagogy. But sometimes talent ignores the usual progression. I think you could handle it. Her throat tightened. Me? I'm just starting. I don't even know what I don't know. That's exactly the point, he said, almost gently. You're not calcified. You see clearly because you haven't learned how not to. Do you know how rare that is? He slid a folder across the desk. Inside was a non-disclosure agreement printed on heavy paper, the kind with spaces for signatures at the bottom. The language was dense, full of phrases like proprietary data and confidentiality of pilot schools. Standard procedure, he said, because we'll be dealing with sensitive information before it's public. I'd encourage you to read carefully, but it's nothing sinister. More about protecting the children than about muzzling you. Emily ran her finger down the page. She thought of Rachel's warning, don't sign anything you can't take home, but she also thought of her mother clipping coupons at the kitchen table, and of her father's quiet pride when she boarded the bus to New York. She wanted this door to stay open. She wanted to prove she belonged on the other side.
Cani, t'es quitte with?
Just to look over tonight, she asked. He hesitated, then smiled. Of course. Caution is wise. I wish more of my colleagues practiced it. He tapped the folder lightly before she slipped it into her bag.
But don't let fear masquerade à wisdom.
At some point, you have to leap. That night, she spread the pages across the dorm desk while Rachel brushed her teeth. Rachel skimmed the first paragraph, frowned, and spat into the sink.
Dix certite.
Once you sign, you can't talk about anything you see or hear. Not even to me. It's a research program, Emily said. Confidentiality makes sense. It makes sense when you're handling patients' medical data. Less sense when you're teaching kids multiplication tables.
Just be careful.
Emily promised she would. She also signed the document the next morning before class, her pen trembling just enough to leave a darker spot where the ink pooled. Anderson thanked her with a nod that felt almost ceremonial, as though she had passed an initiation. Soon her days filled with tasks she hadn't imagined herself capable of, compiling reading lists for pilot schools, transcribing interviews with teachers in Harlem, helping draft surveys that asked students not just what they learned but how it felt in their mouths when they said it aloud. The work consumed her. She stayed late in the library, not because of deadlines but because she was exhilarated. Anderson often appeared at those hours, dropping by with a takeout cup of chai or a reminder to take breaks. Sometimes he asked her opinion on reports written by people decades her senior. Fresh eyes, he said.
Détais-toi t'y valu.
Other professors barely knew her name, but here was the dean himself treating her as an intellectual partner. It was intoxicating. When she called home, Her mother kept asking if she was eating enough. Her father only said, "I'm proud of you, kiddo," which made her swallow hard against the sudden lump in her throat. Still, Rachel remained unconvinced. She watched Emily come back past midnight, exhausted but glowing, and finally said, "He's pulling you into his orbit."
Just, don't lose yourself in it.
Emily bristled. "You make it sound like I'm incapable of making choices." "That's not what I said," Rachel replied. "I'm saying power changes the weight of choices. When someone that high up looks at you, it feels flattering. But it's never just flattery." Emily didn't answer. She thought of the way Anderson's eyes softened when she spoke about Kansas, how he sometimes leaned in as if her words were secrets meant for him alone. She told herself it was mentorship, nothing more. She told herself she was being silly. Late October, Anderson invited her to a small gathering for the program team at a faculty lounge. She arrived in her one nice dress, thrifted but pressed, and found herself surrounded by graduate students and professors speaking in rapid academic shorthand. She hovered at the edges until Anderson appeared beside her with a glass of sparkling water.
You belong here, et murmure. Don't forget that.
She smiled, nerves easing. He introduced her to colleagues, highlighting her insights as though she were already published. She felt seen in a way that was both thrilling and disorienting. When the evening wound down, he offered to walk her back across campus. The quad was nearly empty, the air crisp. "You'll find," he said, hands in his pockets, "that opportunities don't often knock twice. This program, it can change your trajectory. Doors to graduate school, fellowships, maybe even Washington. You could shape the conversation about education in this country."
Emiliès briscoqued.
"That's more than I've ever let myself imagine." "You should imagine it," he said, turning to look at her directly. "Because it's possible. For you." His gaze lingered, warm and steady. For a moment she felt suspended between awe and something else she couldn't quite name. Then he smiled, and the moment dissolved. "Get some rest, Emily.
Big day tomorrow."
Back in her room, Rachel was asleep, earplugs in. Emily sat on the bed with the leaves of grass open on her lap. She read the inscription again, "There are multitudes in you." She tried to believe it meant the version of herself that belonged in New York, in the dean's office, in rooms where decisions about children's futures were made. But she also felt a flicker of unease, as though those multitudes might not all be hers to control. By November, Emily's days blurred into one another. Her coursework remained demanding, but the innovation program consumed the corners of her time like ivy wrapping itself around a brick wall. The tasks multiplied, attending planning meetings, compiling teacher surveys, editing proposal drafts that bore Anderson's name at the top but contained traces of her phrasing within. She told herself she was learning faster than any class could have taught her, but sometimes she lay awake wondering whether she was still a student or already something else. Anderson seemed to notice everything, the way she tilted her head when she was unsure of a word, the way she smoothed the cuff of her sleeve before speaking. He always made space for her voice at the table, yet his presence lingered around her like a gravitational field. She would enter a meeting convinced she had nothing to add, only to find herself explaining a point with his gaze fixed on her, nodding as though she'd said exactly what he'd been waiting to hear. It was exhilarating and unnerving in equal measure. One afternoon in early November, he approached her desk in the library. "We've been invited to present preliminary findings in Chicago," he said. "The district there is considering piloting our literacy module."
"I'd like you to come." Emily blinked.
"Chicago? That's me. You helped draft the module. Who better to answer questions?" He smiled faintly. "Besides, you need to see education outside these ivy walls. It'll ground you." Her heart raced. She had never been further west than Denver on a family road trip. "I'd have to check my schedule. And funding." "The program covers travel," he said, as if brushing aside an inconsequential detail.
"Talk to your professor."
"They'll excuse you. I'll see to it." The following week, she boarded a plane with Anderson and 2 graduate students. The others spent most of the flight buried in laptops, but Anderson leaned across the aisle and asked Emily what she saw when she looked out the window. She described the quilt of farmland giving way to gray highways and industrial scars. He listened intently, as though her impressions were data worth recording. In Chicago, the first day was a whirl of classrooms and district offices. Emily took notes feverishly as teachers described overcrowded classes and outdated textbooks. When asked to speak, she found her voice surprisingly steady. Literature can be a lifeline, she told them. If students see themselves in the words, they begin to believe their own voices matter. Heads nodded. She Saw Anderson watching her, pride visible in his expression, and something in her both thrilled and trembled. That evening, they checked into a downtown hotel. The graduate students were staying elsewhere, leaving only Anderson and Emily at the desk. The receptionist slid 2 key cards across the counter, and Anderson scooped them up before Emily could reach. "I'll handle it," he said casually. She assumed he meant he would distribute them once they reached the elevator. But when the doors closed and he pressed their floor, he handed her 1 card without comment. It wasn't until she opened the door that she realized both cards belonged to the same suite. Her pulse quickened. "I thought there'd be separate rooms." He set his bag down by the desk. "There was a mix-up. The conference is in town, everything's overbooked. I'll call the front desk, but I can't promise availability." He looked at her, almost amused by her discomfort. "It's a 2-bedroom suite."
Hardly scandaleux.
Emily nodded, forcing a laugh. "Of course.
Just unexpected."
The suite was elegant in a way that made her feel out of place. Thick carpet, leather chairs, a panoramic view of the river. 2 bedrooms branched off from the living area, each with its own door. She retreated into one quickly, heart thudding. It was fine, she told herself. Perfectly fine.
Nothing impropre.
Still, when she lay in bed that night, she couldn't sleep. Every sound from the suite, the creak of a floorboard, the murmur of his phone call, reminded her of his proximity. The next morning, Anderson acted as though nothing were unusual. Over coffee he outlined the day's agenda, praising her performance with the teachers. "You have a gift for clarity," he said. "Don't underestimate it." She smiled awkwardly. Praise from him carried weight, but it also tangled inside her chest. She wondered whether it was purely academic or something else. She wondered whether she was foolish for even asking. On the flight back to New York, Emily found herself staring at the city lights below as the plane descended. They glittered like a net, beautiful, but also trapping. She asked herself whether she was still steering her own path or whether Anderson's orbit had begun to dictate her course. Rachel noticed immediately when she returned. "You're quieter," she said that evening, setting down a cup of tea. "How was Chicago?" Emily hesitated. "Good. Productive. They might adopt the module." And nothing," Emily insisted too quickly. "It was fine." Rachel studied her face. "Emily, you don't owe me details, but you do owe yourself honesty. Did anything happen?"
Émilie shook her head.
"No. Not really. Just, he notices things. More than most people." "That's exactly what worries me."
Rachel leaned back.
"People in power are good at noticing. They make you feel singular, like you're the only one in the room. But that doesn't mean their attention is safe." Emily bristled. "He's my mentor. He believes in me. No one else here has done that."
Rachel sighed. Belief is good.
"Just make sure it's your belief in yourself that carries you forward, not his belief in what you can do for him." Emily turned away, stung though she couldn't explain why. She told herself Rachel didn't understand, that this was an opportunity she couldn't afford to sabotage with suspicion. Yet deep down, a sliver of unease had lodged itself in her chest. In the weeks that followed, Anderson's involvement in her life deepened. He asked her opinion on faculty debates, invited her to sit in on meetings usually closed to undergraduates, praised her insights in front of colleagues. Each gesture left her simultaneously elevated and indebted. When he pressed a chai into her hand during a late-night work session, she felt a warmth that was not entirely from the drink. When he lingered a fraction too long on her response, she felt both proud and unsettled. At night, she opened Leaves of Grass and read lines about the self-containing multitudes. She tried to believe she was simply growing into more versions of herself, student, researcher, future teacher. But in the quiet, she wondered whether some of those versions were being chosen for her. By December, New York had shed its autumn colors for bare branches and early dusks. The campus quads glittered with frost, and students hurried between classes wrapped in scarves, breath puffing in clouds. Emily buried herself in final papers and the last push of the semester, yet the innovation program loomed over everything else. Meetings stretched later, Anderson's demands more frequent, the boundaries of her time and identity blurrier with each passing week. Rachel's patience was thinning. "You're never here anymore," she said one night as Emily dropped her bag by the door after midnight. "I don't even remember the last time you ate dinner in this apartment." Emily tried to laugh it off. "That's what final season looks like." "No. Final season looks like too much coffee and bad takeout. What you're doing looks like someone living a double life." Rachel crossed her arms. "Is he pushing you this hard, or are you pushing yourself because he told you you're special?" Emily stiffened. "Both, maybe. He believes in me. That matters." Rachel's eyes softened for a moment, but her tone remained sharp. "Just remember, belief can be a leash as much as a gift." Emily looked away.
You don't understand.
"You're right," Rachel said. "I don't understand what it feels like to have the dean of your school decide you're worth his time. But I do know what it looks like when someone is getting pulled in too deep." The conversation ended in silence, each of them retreating into their rooms. Emily lay awake, staring at the ceiling, the echo of Rachel's words circling her thoughts. She told herself Anderson's mentorship was genuine, that he saw something in her no one else had, but the unease in her chest refused to disappear. The next morning, Emily opened her laptop to check class emails and found the campus news forum buzzing. At first she thought it was just chatter about finals, but then she saw the headline pinned at the top, an open letter about power and silence. Her heart thudded as she clicked. The letter was unsigned, typed in plain font, addressed to the students of Columbia. It began with a calm, steady voice. "I was once like you, young hopeful, convinced I had found a mentor who believed in me. What I learned, however, is that belief can turn into control, and mentorship can twist into possession. Professor William Anderson is not the man you think he is."
Emilie s'en chouk as she scrolled.
The letter laid out allegations of inappropriate relationships, of students groomed with promises of opportunity, of careers derailed when they tried to step away. It gave no names but mentioned time frames stretching back over a decade. It described the same mixture of praise and control Emily herself had experienced: the invitations, the secrecy, the feeling of being chosen and trapped at once. The final line chilled her: "I cannot remain silent, but I also cannot reveal my name.
Too many doors close when you speak the truth about powerful men."
Emilie sat frozen. The words felt as though they had been pulled from her own unspoken fears. She read them again and again, unable to decide whether to feel vindicated, horrified, or both. Within hours, the letter was everywhere, shared on group chats, whispered about in dining halls, dissected in student government meetings. Some dismissed it outright. Anyone can write something anonymous. It doesn't mean anything. Others took it as gospel truth. Finally, someone saying what we all suspected. Rumors flared, naming possible authors. Emily heard her own name mentioned in passing outside the library, two students whispering as she walked by. Wasn't she in Chicago with him? Maybe she wrote it. Her stomach dropped. She quickened her pace, pretending not to hear. That evening, her phone buzzed. A text from Anderson: "We need to talk."
Don't répondre.
My office, 8 p.m. Emily stared at the screen. She told herself it was routine, that he wanted to address the storm brewing on campus. Still, her palms dampened with sweat as she walked across the quiet quad, the lamps casting long shadows over the frosted grass. Anderson's office was dim except for the desk lamp. He looked calm, though his jaw was tight. "Sit," he said, gesturing toward the chair opposite his desk. She obeyed. "You've seen the letter?" "Yes." He leaned back, folding his hands. "It's nonsense.
Anonymous slander.
And yet, because it's anonymous, it spreads like wildfire. I need you to understand, this is how people try to tear down what they can't build themselves." Emily nodded faintly, unsure what else to do.
You've been close to me.
"People will speculate. They already are." His gaze fixed on her, unwavering.
I need your discretion, Emilie.
"I need you to remember the NDA you signed. This program matters too much to be derailed by rumors." "I didn't," her voice caught. She cleared her throat. "I didn't write it." "I know." He softened, almost paternal. "But silence is sometimes the greatest loyalty. Do you understand? Emily swallowed hard. Yes. Good. He rose, walked around the desk, and placed a hand briefly on her shoulder. I've invested in you because you're exceptional.
Don't let gossip define you. Keep your head down, keep working.
This storm will pass. She nodded again, though inside, her heart pounded. The warmth of his hand lingered even after he withdrew, a weight she couldn't shake. Back in her room, Rachel was waiting. Where were you? Meeting, Emily said quickly, dropping her bag. With him. Emily turned, defensive. He just wanted to talk about the letter. Rachel studied her face. And what did he say? Emily hesitated. That it's lies. That I should ignore it. And do you believe him? Emily opened her mouth, then closed it again. She didn't know the answer. The letter echoed in her head, its words overlapping with her own unspoken fears. She thought of Chicago, of the single suite, of the way his eyes lingered too long, of the NDA. She thought of the hand on her shoulder, light and heavy all at once. I don't know, she whispered finally. Rachel sighed, her expression both frustrated and worried. Then you need to decide soon. Because staying silent isn't neutral, Emily. It's choosing his side. Emily turned away, staring out the window at the snow beginning to fall. Each flake landed quietly, melting into the dark street below, as unnoticed as a whisper no one dared to speak aloud. Winter break loomed, but campus felt anything but restful. The anonymous letter had become the axis around which every conversation turned. In dining halls, in dorm lounges, on the crowded steps of Butler Library, students debated endlessly. Was the letter the truth finally clawing its way into daylight, or was it a smear campaign against a respected dean? Emily moved through it all like a ghost. Whispers followed her in the corridors. A classmate in American Lit glanced at her, whispered to another, then both fell silent when she looked their way. The rumors were insidious, spreading faster than she could track. Some were absurd, claims that she had written the letter to cover a failed romance, others more cutting, that she was Anderson's latest favorite, destined to burn like those before her. Rachel tried to shield her from it, intercepting questions, redirecting conversations. But Emily could see the strain in her roommate's face. This isn't sustainable, Rachel said one night, tossing her phone onto the bed.
You can't keep living with this shadow over you.
I didn't write the letter, Emily said, hugging her knees. That doesn't matter anymore, Rachel replied. People already believe what they want.
The real question is, what do you believe?
Emily had no answer. Anderson, meanwhile, seemed unshaken. If anything, he doubled down on his confidence, walking campus with the same steady stride, his voice calm in meetings, his reputation a shield. In private, though, he pressed harder. One evening in his office, after a long session revising program proposals, he leaned back in his chair. They'll come after anyone who shines, he said. It's easier to believe in shadows than to face the light. He fixed his eyes on her.
You shine, Emily.
That's why they target you by association. Her cheeks flushed. I don't feel like I'm shining. That's because you're young, he said gently. You mistake fear for weakness, when in truth it means you're standing in a place worth fearing.
Et leaned closer.
Do you understand how rare it is for someone your age to carry this kind of potential?
That is why he chose you.
That's why you mustn't falter now. The word chose echoed uncomfortably inside her. She nodded anyway, caught between pride and unease. The line between mentorship and something else blurred further during the program's holiday gathering. Faculty, graduate students, and a handful of undergraduates crowded into a wood-paneled lounge with a fire crackling in the hearth. Laughter mingled with the clink of glasses. Emily felt out of place in her thrift store dress until Anderson appeared beside her, offering a glass of sparkling cider. You've worked harder than anyone this semester, he said. You deserve to be celebrated. Thank you, she murmured, trying not to notice the way his gaze lingered on her face longer than seemed professional. Later, as the party wound down, she reached for her coat only to find him helping her into it. His hands brushed her shoulders lightly, almost imperceptibly, but enough to send a jolt through her. She told herself it was nothing. Just courtesy. Yet her pulse betrayed her. That night, she couldn't sleep. She replayed every moment, searching for signs she was imagining it. Maybe she was overthinking. Maybe she was flattered because she was desperate to be seen. She clutched leaves of grass to her chest and whispered, "multitudes," as though the word could hold her together. The next week, an email appeared in her inbox with the subject line, "I know what you're going through." She almost deleted it, thinking it was spam. But curiosity tugged.
The message was brief. I've been where you are.
His praise feels like sunlight until you realize it burns.
If you want to talk, Amir.
Ash. Emily's stomach dropped. She read it 3 times, her heart hammering. Who was H? Could it be the author of the anonymous letter? Or just another rumor monger? She closed her laptop quickly when Rachel walked in, guilt flooding her even though she had done nothing wrong. For days, she told no one.
The message on Tether.
She checked her inbox compulsively, half hoping for a follow-up, half dreading it. Finally, she responded with a single line, "Who are you?" The reply came within an hour.
My name is Ana Lopez. You said to be where you are now.
Can we meet? Emily stared at the screen.
The name tugged at her memory.
She remembered hearing whispers last year about a graduate assistant who had dropped out suddenly, leaving a promising thesis unfinished. Could this be her? That evening, she confided in Rachel. "I got an email from someone named Hannah Lopez." Rachel's eyes widened. "Hannah? I think I've heard of her. She worked with Anderson before you. And then she disappeared." Emily nodded slowly. "She wants to meet."
Rachel leaned forward.
"Then we're going with you. Not alone." Emily hesitated. She might just want to talk. "Or she might be the only one who understands," Rachel said firmly. "Either way, you don't go alone." Emily agreed, though uneasily. Part of her feared what Hannah might reveal. Another part feared what it would mean if Hannah confirmed the letter's truth, that she wasn't imagining the manipulation, that she was part of a pattern stretching back years. Meanwhile, Anderson grew more insistent. After the holiday, he called Emily into his office. The blinds were drawn, the campus quiet under snow. "Rumors don't scare me," he said. "But they can destroy people without cause. That's why you must be careful. You signed the NDA for a reason." He leaned forward, his voice dropping. "Trust is everything, Emily. Once broken, it can't be repaired."
Do you trust me?
She swallowed, forcing herself to meet his eyes. "Yes." "Good." He smiled, but there was a steel edge beneath it. "Then stay close. Don't let them pull you away with lies." Emily left the office shaken. She wanted to believe him, to cling to the certainty of his confidence. But Hannah's email burned in her pocket like a secret she couldn't ignore. When she met Rachel later that evening, she whispered the truth aloud for the first time. What if the letter wasn't a lie?
What if I'm next?
Rachel took her hand. Then maybe it's time to stop whispering. Outside, snowflakes drifted down, soft and silent, covering the campus in white. Emily felt as though she were standing at the edge of something vast and cold, unsure whether to step forward or turn back. The cafe in Boston was small, tucked on a side street near a subway stop, its windows fogged against the January cold. Emily wrapped her scarf tighter as she and Rachel stepped inside. The smell of coffee and cinnamon lingered in the air, and students hunched over laptops filled most of the tables. In the corner, a woman with dark hair pulled into a messy bun lifted her eyes from a paperback. "Emily?" she asked. Emily nodded nervously. "Hannah." The woman rose, offering a tentative smile. She looked to be in her late 20s, dressed in jeans and a sweater, her face both youthful and worn. There was a sharpness to her eyes, like someone who had learned to read danger before it arrived.
Rachel shook her hand first. "We came together."
"I didn't want Emily traveling alone."
"Smart," Anna said softly.
She gestured toward the table. "Let's sit." They ordered coffee, but none of them touched it. Hannah clasped her hands around her mug as though she needed the warmth.
For a moment, silence stretched.
Then she said, "I know how strange this must feel, getting an email from someone you've never met. But I read the letter that's been circulating, and I knew I couldn't stay quiet anymore. I thought, maybe you'd understand." Emily's heart thudded.
"Did you write it?"
"No," Hannah said. "But I could have. Every word of it was true for me."
Rachel leaned forward.
You worked with Anderson. Hannah nodded slowly. 2 years ago. I was a grad student in education policy. He recruited me for the same program you're in now. Told me I had a perspective no one else did. That I was chosen. The word chosen made Emily's stomach twist. At first, it was everything I'd dreamed of, Hannah continued. Access to meetings, real influence on projects. He praised me in front of people I admired. It felt like I mattered. She paused, her voice tightening. Then it changed. He started asking me to stay late. Little things at first, helping with emails, reviewing drafts. Then it was dinners, trips. He blurred the lines so gradually I barely noticed until I was trapped. Emily's hands clenched in her lap.
What do you mean, trapped?
Hannah looked directly at her. He made me believe my future depended on him. That if I pulled away, my work would vanish, my career would end before it began. He was careful.
Always careful.
Nothing outright illegal, just a web of favors and expectations. Until one night I said no to something he asked. After that, doors closed. Recommendations disappeared. My advisor suddenly distanced herself. Within months, I realized I had no future left at Columbia. So I left. Rachel's voice was sharp. And no one stopped him? Who would?
Anna gave a Bitterlog.
He was the dean.
Beloved, respected.
Students lined up to take his classes. Faculty owed him favors. The administration wanted him happy because he brought in grants. I tried to complain once, quietly. I was told I must have misunderstood his intentions. That I was lucky to have his mentorship. Emily felt a sick familiarity. That's what he tells me too. That I'm lucky. You're not lucky, Hannah said firmly.
You're vulnerable.
He knows how to find people like us, the ones hungry for opportunity, desperate to prove ourselves. He feeds that hunger until it becomes dependence. Emily's throat tightened. I've signed an NDA.
If he say anything.
Hannah nodded grimly. So did I. That's how he keeps us silent. But an NDA can't erase the truth. It can't erase what he's done. Rachel interjected, do you have proof? Anything that could hold up if we challenged him?
For a moment, Anna hesitated.
Then she reached into her bag and pulled out a small USB drive. She placed it on the table. I didn't want to carry this anymore. Emails.
Voice memo.
Nothing explosive, but enough to show a pattern. He used to send me recordings of his lectures to review. Once, he slipped up and left comments that weren't meant for anyone else to hear. Emily stared at the drive as though it were radioactive. Why are you giving this to me? Because you're still inside, Hannah said quietly. You still have a voice. Mine was taken from me when I walked away. If you're brave enough to speak, maybe together we can stop him. Emily felt the weight of the drive in her hand. It was small, almost laughably so, yet it seemed heavier than anything she'd ever carried. Rachel spoke carefully. If we use this, he'll come after you again. Hannah's smile was tired. He already ruined me.
I don't care anymore.
What I care about is that no one else goes through it. They sat in silence for a moment, the hum of the cafe around them. Emily felt the ground shifting beneath her. Until now, she could almost convince herself she was imagining things, that her unease was paranoia. But here was Hannah, flesh and blood, describing her own story like a mirror held up to Emily's life. When they finally left, Emily tucked the USB into her coat pocket.
The col d'hériteur face like a slap.
She wanted to run back inside and give it back, to pretend she hadn't seen the truth. Instead, she walked in silence beside Rachel toward the train station. On the ride back to New York, Rachel finally spoke. You know what this means. You're not imagining it. He's done this before. Emily closed her eyes. I know.
Rachel leaned closer.
Then we have to decide. Are we going to keep quiet? Or are we going to use this? Emily didn't answer. She pressed her hand against her coat pocket, feeling the sharp edge of the USB. It felt like holding a weapon she wasn't sure she had the courage to use. That night in her dorm, Emily sat at her desk long after Rachel had gone to bed.
She plugged the drive into her laptop, her alarm rang.
Folders opened, emails, some affectionate, some manipulative, all with Anderson's name. Voice recordings with casual phrases that made her skin crawl. One clip froze her breath, his voice low and smooth saying, "No one needs to know. This is just between us." She slammed the laptop shut, her pulse racing. The truth was undeniable now. But the truth was also dangerous. Emily leaned her forehead against the desk, whispering into the dark, "What do I do?" No answer came, only the sound of Rachel's even breathing across the room. Emily knew, however, that silence was no longer an option. The question was no longer whether Anderson was guilty. The question was whether she had the strength to fight him, and to face everything that fight would unleash. The following week passed in a haze. Emily attended classes, turned in assignments, and showed up for program meetings, but everything felt unreal, as though she were walking through a play staged for someone else. The USB drive lay hidden in the bottom drawer of her desk, wrapped inside an old scarf, and every time she opened the drawer to grab a notebook, her pulse spiked. Anderson carried on as if nothing had changed. In fact, he seemed more confident than ever, weaving through campus with the calm authority of a man untouchable. When he glanced at Emily during meetings, she forced herself to meet his gaze, though she now flinched inwardly at the warmth in his smile. Behind it, she could hear the words from the recording, "No one needs to know. This is just between us." Rachel refused to let her retreat into denial. "You can't sit on this forever," she said one evening, closing her laptop with more force than necessary. "Evidence doesn't mean anything if it stays locked in your drawer." Emily rubbed her temples. "If I go public, I'll be shredded. People already whisper about me. And the NDA, he'll use it against me." "That's why you don't go alone," Rachel pressed. "Find someone who knows the system better than he does. A faculty member who actually has integrity."
Emily thought of Professor Margaret Lewis.
She'd taken one of Lewis's seminars on ethics in education the year before. Lewis had a reputation for being uncompromising, even difficult, but her lectures had left Emily shaken in the best way, reminders that education wasn't just theory, it was a moral battlefield. If anyone might listen without dismissing her, it was Lewis. Still, it took days before Emily found the courage to act. Finally, after class on a rainy Thursday, she lingered by the lecture hall doors until the room emptied. Lewis was gathering her notes, her silver hair tied in a bun, her glasses slipping down her nose.
Professor Lewis.
Emily's voice came out smaller than she intended.
Lewis glanced up. MS. Carter, isn't it? What can I do for you?
Emily hesitated.
I need to talk.
Privately. It's important. Something in her tone must have registered, because Lewis's expression softened. She nodded toward her office.
Come.
The office was cramped and lined with shelves, papers stacked in teetering piles. Lewis gestured to a chair, then sat across from her, hands folded. "All right. Speak." Emily took a deep breath. "It's about Dean Anderson." Lewis's eyes narrowed slightly, but she said nothing, waiting. Emily's words tumbled out, hesitant at first, then rushing as though a dam had broken. She told her about Chicago, about the NDA, about the subtle blurring of lines. She told her about Hannah Lopez and the USB drive, her voice shaking as she described the recordings. When she finished, the room felt unbearably still. Lewis leaned back, exhaling through her nose. "I see," she murmured.
You believe me?
Emily asked quickly, desperation creeping in. Lewis regarded her with sharp eyes. "I don't make a habit of dismissing students who come to me with fear in their voices. And yes, I've heard whispers for years."
Nothing could pin down.
"You're not the first." Emily's chest tightened. "So you knew." "I suspected," Lewis corrected. "But suspicion isn't proof. And proof in this world is often ignored when it threatens the powerful." She tilted her head. "Do you still have this evidence from Hannah?" Emily nodded. "Yes. I've listened. It's real." "Then you're sitting on a live grenade," Lewis said matter-of-factly. "The question is whether to throw it." Emily's hands clenched in her lap.
I don't know if I can. Et elle destroy me.
Lewis's expression softened again, though her tone remained firm. "That's exactly what he counts on."
Fear keeps everyone silent.
"But if you're willing, I can help. Not as a savior, I won't pretend I can protect you from every consequence, but as an ally. And you'll need allies. Emily swallowed hard. Why would you risk yourself?
Louise gave a DRY smile.
Because I've already paid the price once. Years ago, I pushed back against a similar man in this very institution. I lost a promotion for it. I've lived with the compromise ever since. I don't intend to watch another generation of women be swallowed by the same machine.
Her word dit Emily like a lifeline.
For the first time, she felt less alone. Louis leaned forward. Here's what we do. We build a record.
Document everything. Date, email, conversation.
That way when we move, it won't just be accusations, it will be a dossier too heavy to ignore. Emily nodded slowly, hope flickering through her fear. Over the next weeks, they worked in secrecy. Rachel joined them, cautious but determined. They met in Louis's office after hours, or in quiet corners of the library. Hannah called in on video, her face grainy but her voice steady. Together they pieced timelines, cross-referenced stories, gathered documents. The picture that emerged was damning, a pattern of behavior spanning years, masked by Anderson's charm and shielded by his influence. One night, as Emily scrolled through old program emails, she froze. Buried in a chain was a message forwarded from Anderson to a colleague, Richard Hayes, former Deputy Secretary of Education. She remembered Hannah's warning about connections at high levels. The email was innocuous on the surface, but the familiarity in the language suggested a close relationship. When she showed it to Louis, the professor pursed her lips. Hayes and Anderson go back decades. If Hayes is involved, this won't just be about a dean abusing his power. This will reach into federal policy circles. Emily felt her stomach drop. Then what chance do we have? The truth, Louis said simply. It doesn't guarantee victory, but it shifts the ground beneath them. And once the ground shifts, even giants can fall. For the first time, Emily allowed herself to imagine it, Anderson confronted, stripped of his aura of untouchability. But imagining it also terrified her. What would become of her scholarship, of the fragile dream she had carried from Kansas? That night, she returned to her dorm exhausted but restless. She opened Leaves of Grass and found herself staring at the line she had underlined months ago, "Tell all the truth but tell it slant." She whispered it aloud, wondering if Dickinson had ever felt the weight of truth pressing so heavily against her ribs. Rachel stirred from her bed. "You okay?" Emily nodded slowly. "I think for the first time, I might be." Rachel smiled faintly. "Then let's finish what we started." Emily closed the book. For once, the words didn't feel abstract. They felt like marching orders. February brought biting winds and an undercurrent of tension that never seemed to leave the campus. Posters had begun appearing on bulletin boards and dorm walls, accountability in education printed in bold letters, with meeting times for student forums. The anonymous letter had opened a wound, and now the wound was festering into outrage. Professor Louis moved quickly. She pressed the administration to call an internal hearing, an inquiry into the allegations surrounding Anderson. The provost resisted at first, citing the dean's sterling reputation, but mounting student pressure forced their hand. A panel was convened, faculty members, a student representative, and a retired judge brought in as a neutral party. The announcement sent shockwaves across the university. Anderson himself issued a statement through the school's press office, "I welcome any fair and thorough review. I have devoted my life to education and mentorship, and I have nothing to hide." Emily read the statement 3 times, her stomach churning.
Nothing to hide. She knew better.
The USB in her drawer said otherwise. Hannah's haunted eyes said otherwise. The hearing was scheduled for late February in Low Library, in one of the grand wood panel chambers usually reserved for donor events. Students began calling it the trial, and in many ways, it was. On the morning of the hearing, Emily stood outside the library steps, clutching her coat against the wind. Rachel stood beside her, steady and firm. "You don't have to do this alone," she reminded her. Emily nodded, though her legs felt heavy. "I know. But I have to walk in myself."
Inside, the chamber buzzed with low voices.
Faculty in suits, administrators whispering, a row of students clutching notebooks. At the front sat the panel, papers stacked neatly before them. Anderson was already there, seated at the table with his lawyer. He looked immaculate as always, calm, composed, his expression faintly amused, as though this were beneath him. When his eyes met Emily's across the room, he gave the faintest nod, a gesture that felt more like a warning than reassurance. Professor Lewis caught Emily's gaze and gestured for her to sit beside her. The sight of Lewis's steady presence gave Emily strength. The provost opened the proceedings with practiced solemnity. "We are here to address allegations concerning Dean William Anderson. This inquiry is not a criminal trial, but a matter of institutional integrity." Anderson's lawyer immediately objected to the framing. "Allegations based on hearsay, rumors, and unsigned letters. Let's not dignify this circus." The retired judge on the panel adjusted his glasses. "We will determine what deserves dignity. Please proceed." One by one, testimonies began. A graduate student spoke cautiously about boundaries that sometimes felt blurred. Another described being promised opportunities that vanished when she declined invitations outside of class. Their words were careful, vague, fear evident in every pause. Anderson's lawyer dismissed them as misunderstandings, extrapolations, and academic sour grapes. Then it was Emily's turn. Her name was called, and she rose on trembling legs. As she walked to the front, she felt the weight of every eye in the chamber. She sat at the witness table, palms sweating against the polished wood. "State your name," the judge said. "Emily Carter," she whispered, then cleared her throat.
Undergraduate student, School of Education.
The first questions were simple: how she came into the program, her interactions with Anderson. She answered carefully, describing his mentorship without embellishment, though her voice shook. Then the questions cut deeper. "Did you ever feel pressured in your relationship with Dean Anderson?" Emily hesitated. Her heart pounded. Anderson's gaze burned against her skin. She remembered his words: "Trust is everything. Once broken, it can't be repaired." She remembered Hannah's USB in her drawer.
She remembered Rachel's steady hand gripinière.
"Yes," she said finally, her voice steadier than she felt. "He blurred the line between mentorship and control. He created a sense that my future depended on him, that if I disappointed him, doors would close."
A murmure rippled through the chamber.
Anderson's lawyer pounced. "Ms. Carter, isn't it true that you benefited from this mentorship? That you traveled, gained experience, received opportunities others could only dream of?" "Yes," Emily admitted. "But those opportunities came with strings attached. Strings I never agreed to." The lawyer leaned closer. "And yet you continued to work with him. Why would you do that, if his behavior was so inappropriate?" Emily's throat tightened, but she forced herself to answer. "Because I was afraid. Because when someone that powerful tells you you're chosen, you believe them. And because walking away felt like losing everything I'd worked for." The silence after her words was heavy. Lewis rose then, her voice cutting through. "The pattern here is clear. We are not talking about isolated misunderstandings. We are talking about a system of influence built on dependence and silence. And we have more than testimony." She gestured toward Emily. Emily reached into her bag with trembling fingers and withdrew the USB. She placed it on the table. "This drive contains correspondence and recordings provided by Hannah Lopez, a former student. It demonstrates a consistent pattern of manipulation. We are submitting it into evidence." Gasps filled the chamber. Anderson's composure flickered for the first time, his jaw tightening. His lawyer objected furiously, calling it inadmissible, stolen property. But the judge silenced him. "We will review it." The hearing recessed briefly while the panel listened to the files in a side room.
Emily sat frozen, staring at the grain of the wood before her.
She imagined the panel hearing the low, smooth voice, "No one needs to know. This is just between us." When the panel returned, the air in the chamber had shifted. The judge's expression was grim. "These materials are troubling," he said. "They suggest a pattern of behavior inconsistent with the responsibilities of an academic leader." Anderson's lawyer erupted again, but the words felt hollow now. The murmurs in the chamber had turned into open whispers of outrage. For the first time, Emily saw fear flicker in Anderson's eyes. It was brief, gone in a moment, but it was enough. The hearing adjourned with no final verdict, only the promise of further review, and the announcement that Anderson would be placed on temporary leave pending investigation. Outside the library, the air was electric. Students clustered in groups, some cheering, others stunned. Reporters had gathered, snapping photos, shouting questions. Rachel pushed through the crowd to Emily's side, grabbing her arm. "You did it. You really did it."
Emily shook her head. "It's not over."
Rachel smiled grimly.
"No."
"But the cracks are showing. And once cracks appear, walls can fall." Emily looked back at the grand steps of Low Library, where Anderson had once seemed untouchable. For the first time, she allowed herself to believe he might not be invincible after all. For a few brief days after the hearing, Emily felt as though she could breathe again. Students stopped whispering behind her back, some even approached her in the dining hall to thank her for speaking out. Hannah's name surfaced in conversations, no longer just a shadow but a survivor whose story mattered. It felt, fleetingly, like momentum was on their side. Then the counterstrike came. On Monday morning, the university newspaper ran a headline across its front page: "Dean Anderson targeted in smear campaign." The article quoted unnamed senior officials describing the hearing as a misguided spectacle driven by overzealous faculty and impressionable students. It claimed Anderson's suspension was procedural and assured readers that he would be cleared. That afternoon, national outlets picked up the story. A statement from Richard Hayes, former Deputy Secretary of Education, appeared on CNN. "William Anderson is a man of integrity. I have known him for decades. These allegations are baseless, the product of rumor and vendetta. We must not allow our best educators to be torn down by hysteria." Emily watched the clip on Rachel's laptop, her stomach sinking. "He's pulling out the big guns," Rachel muttered. "This isn't just damage control. It's war." By evening, emails began flooding Emily's inbox. Some were supportive, from students and even faculty thanking her for her courage. Others were vicious, anonymous messages calling her a liar, a manipulator, an opportunist trying to ruin a good man.
"Shame on you. Go back to Kansas.
You'll regret this." Emily slammed her laptop shut, hands trembling.
I can't do this."
Rachel grabbed her shoulders. "Hey, look at me. This is exactly what he wants. He wants to scare you back into silence."
"I'm not strong enough," Emily whispered.
"Yes, you are," Rachel said fiercely.
"Because you're not alone anymore."
But even as Rachel spoke, Emily felt the weight pressing down. Anderson had power that stretched far beyond Columbia's walls. He had allies in politics, media, donors. Against that, she was just one student. The next day, Professor Lewis called her into her office. The older woman's face was drawn but determined. "He's mobilizing his network. We expected this. Hayes' statement proves how high this goes." Emily sat heavily in the chair. "Then we've already lost."
Lewis shook her head.
"Not necessarily. His strength is in shadows, connections, whispers, influence.
Ours must be in the open.
If we go fully public, documents, testimonies, recordings, we can shift the narrative." Emily swallowed. That would mean breaking the NDA.
He could lose everything. My scholarship, my degree.
"Yes," Lewis interrupted gently. "There will be consequences. But Emily, sometimes silence costs more than speaking." That night, Emily sat on her dorm bed staring at the USB. She imagined herself standing on a stage, the world watching, her future dissolving with every word. She imagined her parents back in Kansas reading headlines about their daughter caught in a scandal. She imagined Anderson smiling that calm, patronizing smile, confident she would crumble.
Rachel broke the silence. "What are you thinking?"
"I'm thinking," Emily said slowly, "that if I stay quiet he wins.
And if he speak, maybe lose.
But at least it's my choice." Rachel squeezed her hand.
Then we make it together.
The following week, student activists organized a town hall in Lerner Hall. Hundreds filled the auditorium, students, faculty, reporters. On stage sat Emily, Rachel, Professor Lewis, and Hannah Lopez, who had traveled down from Boston despite her fear. The tension was palpable, the air buzzing with anticipation. The moderator, a student journalist, introduced them and asked why they were there. For a moment, Emily's throat closed. She stared at the sea of faces, at the cameras recording every twitch of her expression. She thought she might bolt. Then she caught sight of Hannah in the corner of her eye, her hands trembling but her chin lifted. She saw Rachel beside her, steady as a pillar. She thought of her parents, the pride in her father's voice when she'd first left for New York. Emily leaned toward the microphone.
My name is Emily Carter.
I am a student in the School of Education. And I am here because silence is killing us. The room went utterly still. She continued, voice shaking but growing steadier. She told her story, not in every detail but enough. The flattery that became dependence. The invitations that blurred boundaries. The constant fear that her future depended on keeping him pleased. Then she spoke of Hannah, of others unnamed, of the USB drive that contained his own words. This is not just my story, Emily said, her voice rising. This is a pattern. A system. A culture that rewards power and punishes those who speak against it. Dean Anderson is not untouchable. And neither should anyone else be. The audience erupted in applause. Reporters scribbled furiously. Cameras flashed. Emily felt as though a dam had broken inside her, truth spilling out where fear had once kept it locked. That night, social media exploded. Clips of her speech spread across Twitter and TikTok.
#Trended, #Troussat Columbia, #Student
National outlets that had once echoed Anderson's defenders now ran with Emily's words. But Anderson struck back just as quickly. His lawyer released a statement calling her speech defamatory theatrics. Donors threatened to pull funding. Hayes appeared again on television, doubling down. We cannot allow the future of education to be dictated by unverified claims from disgruntled students. The battle lines were drawn. Columbia's administration wavered, torn between loyalty to a powerful dean and the roar of public opinion. Late one night, Emily received a call from an unknown number. She almost ignored it, but something compelled her to answer. A low voice spoke.
Emily Carter.
You don't know me, but I used to work in the Department of Education. Hayes isn't just protecting Anderson out of friendship. There are files, grants, funding streams that tie them together. If you want to bring him down, follow the money. The line went dead. Emily sat frozen, phone in hand.
Follow the money.
When she told Lewis and Rachel the next morning, Lewis's eyes gleamed. This just became bigger than Columbia. If Anderson and Hayes are tied financially, we're looking at corruption at the federal level.
Rachel exhaled.
Then we're in deeper than we thought. Emily nodded slowly. For months she had been running from the truth. Now she was sprinting toward it. The storm was far from over. But for the first time, she didn't feel like prey. She felt like someone holding a weapon. March arrived with a restless energy that seemed to vibrate through every hallway of Columbia. What had started as whispers in dorm rooms had now grown into something uncontainable, a national conversation. Students carried signs across the quad, journalists swarmed outside the library, and faculty meetings turned into shouting matches. Anderson remained suspended, but his presence lingered like a ghost. His defenders still rallied, wealthy donors, alumni, politicians who owed him favors. Hayes continued his media blitz, portraying Emily and her allies as reckless children jeopardizing the future of American education. But the cracks deepened. Following the late-night call, Professor Lewis and Rachel began tracing grant records. What they found was damning. Millions in federal education funds funneled through initiatives Anderson spearheaded, with contracts awarded to companies tied to Hayes' network. The money trail wasn't just messy, it was corrupt. Lewis contacted an investigative journalist she trusted, someone who had exposed scandals before. Within weeks, the story broke. Education funds funneled two cronies, Dean Anderson at center of controversy. The revelation shifted everything. This was no longer about mentorship boundaries or inappropriate behavior. This was about money, politics, corruption. Suddenly, national newspapers that had once dismissed the student voices were demanding answers. Emily watched the coverage from her dorm, hands clenched around her mug. She should have felt victorious, but all she felt was tired. The fight had consumed her entire year. She barely remembered what it felt like to sit in a classroom simply to learn, without the weight of the world pressing down. Rachel noticed.
You veux carrier 10 tout long, she said softly one night.
Even if he falls, you're allowed to put it down. But Emily shook her head. Not yet.
Note un tilizzo vert.
The climax came in April, when federal investigators announced formal inquiries into both Anderson and Hayes. Subpoenas were issued. Emails and financial records seized. The news hit campus like an earthquake. Anderson called a press conference. Dressed immaculately, he stood before a row of microphones, his lawyer at his side. "I have dedicated my life to the noble pursuit of education," he declared. "These allegations are politically motivated attacks, designed to dismantle progress and silence innovation. I deny them categorically." Emily watched from her dorm, bile rising in her throat. His voice was calm, persuasive, the same voice that had once convinced her she was chosen. For a moment, she wondered if the world would believe him again. But then, almost poetically, the networks cut from Anderson's denial to clips of Emily's town hall speech, to Hannah Lopez's testimony, to documents showing the money trail.
The contrast was stark.
For the first time, Anderson's words looked small. Within days, Columbia announced his resignation. Hayes, under mounting scrutiny, stepped down from his consulting firm. Donors withdrew quietly, distancing themselves from the scandal.
Anderson left campus with no fanfare, juste à blague car pulling away from law librairie.
Emily watched from across the quad, her heart a storm of conflicting feelings, relief, anger, sorrow. She had once believed in him. She had once built her identity around his approval. Now he was gone, leaving behind the rubble of that belief. But victory came with cost. Emily's inbox was still flooded daily, praise from strangers, hate from others. She had become a symbol, and symbols were never allowed to rest. Classes felt impossible, professors treated her with either too much reverence or thinly veiled suspicion. Walking across campus, she felt eyes on her constantly. One evening she told Rachel, "I don't know who I am without this fight."
I don't remember what I came here for.
Rachel took her hand. "Then maybe it's time to remember. You came here because you love teaching. Because you wanted to change lives. That hasn't changed. Don't let him take that from you too." Her words struck Emily like truth. At semester's end, Emily returned to Kansas for the first time since the storm began. The wide-open sky felt surreal after months of stone buildings and relentless scrutiny. She sat with her parents on the porch, watching the sun set over the fields. Her father said little, just squeezed her hand. Her mother, eyes wet, whispered, "We're proud of you." For the first time in months, Emily allowed herself to cry. Not out of fear, not out of exhaustion, but out of release. In the fall, she returned to Columbia, but differently. She declined invitations to speak on panels, ignored requests for interviews. She focused on her classes, on student teaching in a public school in Harlem, on listening to children sound out words for the first time. That, she realized, was where her future had always been. Not in the orbit of powerful men, not in headlines, but in classrooms. Hannah visited once, sitting with Emily and Rachel in a quiet cafe. They spoke not of Anderson but of books, of future plans, of ordinary life. It felt like reclaiming something stolen. Professor Lewis remained a mentor, though a different kind, one who asked hard questions but never blurred lines. She reminded Emily often, the cost of truth is real, but so is its worth. On a crisp October afternoon, Emily walked alone across campus. The leaves had turned red and gold, the air sharp with autumn. She paused on the steps of Low Library, staring up at the columns where once she had felt so small. She remembered the first day she'd walked there, clutching a notebook, believing the world would open its arms if only she proved worthy.
Now she knew better.
The world didn't open easily. You had to pry it open. And sometimes when you did, the light that spilled out blinded everyone who had grown too comfortable in the dark. She smiled faintly, pulling from her bag the battered copy of Leaves of Grass. She opened to the inscription Anderson had once written, "There are multitudes in you." For months, those words had felt like chains. Now they felt different. She whispered them aloud, softly but firmly, "There are multitudes in me." She slipped the book back into her bag and walked down the steps. Ahead lay her student teaching assignment, and children waiting to read their first sentences aloud. That was enough. That was everything. The storm had left scars, yes. But it had also left clarity. And as Emily crossed the quad, the winter sun breaking through the clouds, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Not fear. Not anger. Hope.